L'antisémitisme renaît de ses cendres, pardon, de nos cendres, et s'appelle antisionisme. Il s'applique aux individus, il s'applique à une nation. Israël est devenu un ghetto. Jérusalem, c'est Varsovie. Les nazis qui nous assiègent parlent arabe. Et si leur croissance se déguise parfois en faucille, c'est pour mieux piéger les gauches du monde entier. Moi qui suis un juif de gauche, je n'en ai rien à faire d'une certaine gauche qui veut libérer tous les hommes aux dépens de certains d'entre eux. Car je suis précisément de ceux-là, d'accord pour la lutte des classes, mais aussi pour le combat et le droit à la différence. Si elle veut me compter parmi les siens, la gauche ne peut pas faire l'économie de mon problème. Et mon problème est simple. Mon problème est que depuis les déportations romaines du 1er siècle après Jésus-Christ, nous avons été partout honnis, bannis, écrasés, spoliés, chassés, traqués et convertis de force. Pourquoi? Parce que notre religion, notre culture était dangereuse. C'était un exemple de démocratie. Vous voulez quelques exemples? Le judaïsme a été le premier à créer le Shabbat, c'est-à-dire le jour de repos hebdomadaire obligatoire. Vous imaginez la joie des pharaons toujours en retard d'une pyramide. Le judaïsme interdit l'esclavage. Vous imaginez la sympathie des Romains, les plus importants grossistes de main-d'œuvre gratuite de l'Antiquité. Il est dit dans la Bible, la terre n'appartient pas à l'homme mais à Dieu. De cette phrase découle une loi, celle de la remise en question automatique de la propriété foncière tous les 49 ans. Tous les 49 ans. Vous voyez l'effet d'une loi pareille sur les papes du Moyen-Âge et les bâtisseurs d'empire de la Renaissance. Il ne fallait pas que les peuples sachent. On commença par interdire la Bible, et puis ce fut la médisance, les murs de la calomnie qui devinrent les murs des ghettos, puis l'Inquisition, les bûchers, et plus tard les étoiles jaunes. Auschwitz n'est qu'un exemple industriel de génocide, mais il y a eu des génocides artisanaux par milliers. J'en aurais pour 3 jours, je vous le jure, rien qu'à nommer tous les pogroms d'Espagne, de Russie, de Pologne et d'Afrique du Nord. À force de fuir, de bouger, le juif est allé partout. On extrapole et voilà. Il n'est de nulle part. Nous sommes au rendez-vous, monsieur Chancel. Je suis effectivement de nulle part. Nous sommes parmi les peuples comme l'enfant à l'assistance publique. Je ne veux plus être adopté. Je ne veux plus que ma vie dépende de l'humeur de mes propriétaires. Je ne veux plus être un citoyen locataire. J'en ai assez de frapper aux portes de l'histoire et d'attendre qu'on me dise entrez. Je rentre et je gueule aujourd'hui. Je suis chez moi sur Terre et sur Terre j'ai ma terre. Elle m'a été promise. Elle sera maintenue. Qu'est-ce que c'est que le sionisme? Ça se réduit à une simple phrase. L'an prochain à Jérusalem. Non, ça n'est pas un slogan du Club Méditerranée. C'est écrit dans la Bible. Le livre le plus vendu et le plus mal lu du monde. Et cette prière est devenue un cri. Un cri qui a aujourd'hui plus de 2000 ans. Et le père de Christophe Colomb, celui de Kafka, celui de Proust, celui de Chagall, celui de Marx, d'Einstein et même de monsieur Kissinger l'ont répété ce cri au moins une fois par an le jour de Pâques. Alors le sionisme c'est du racisme? Mais faites-moi rire. Est-ce que 12 France, cher pays de mon enfance, est un hymne raciste? Le sionisme c'est le nom d'un combat de libération. Dans le monde chacun a ses juifs. Les Français ont les leurs, ce sont les Bretons, les Occitans, les travailleurs immigrés. Les Italiens ont les Siciliens, les Yankees ont leurs Noirs, les Espagnols ont leurs Basques. Nous, on a une prérogative. Nous sommes les Juifs de tous. À ceux qui me disent, et les Palestiniens? Je réponds, je suis un Palestinien d'il y a 2000 ans. Je suis l'opprimé le plus vieux du monde. Opprimé quelquefois et souvent même supprimé. Je discuterai donc avec eux, mais je ne leur céderai pas ma place. Il y a là-bas de la place pour 2 peuples et pour 2 pays, pour 2 nations. Les frontières seront à discuter ensemble, mais l'existence d'un pays ne peut en aucun cas exclure l'existence d'un autre. Et les options politiques d'un gouvernement n'ont jamais mis en cause l'existence d'une nation. Alors pourquoi Israël? Quand Israël sera hors de danger, je choisirai parmi les Juifs et mes voisins arabes ceux qui me sont frères par les idées. Aujourd'hui, je me dois d'être solidaire avec tous les miens, même ceux que je déteste, au nom d'un ennemi insurmontable, le racisme. Descartes avait tort. Je pense donc je suis. Ça ne veut rien dire. Nous, ça fait 5000 ans qu'on pense, et nous n'existons toujours pas. Je me défends, donc je suis.
Jewish people have lived in the land of Israel, what is now the state of Israel, have lived here and have been attached to this place for about 3,500 years, 3.5 millennia. Now, roughly for 2,000 years, we were conquered by the Romans, we were conquered by the Byzantines. They did a lot of bad things to us, but they didn't really exile us, contrary to what people think, okay? The loss of our land actually occurred when the Arab conquest took place in the 7th century. The Arabs burst out from Arabia, and they did something that no other conqueror, not the Romans, not the Byzantines, not the Greeks before them, not Alexander the Great, nobody did before. They actually started taking over the land of the Jewish farmer. They brought in military colonies that took over the land. And gradually, over the next 2 centuries, the Jews became a minority in our land. So it is under the Arab conquest that the Jews lost their homeland. The Arabs were the colonials. The Jews were the natives dispossessed. Well, that happens in history. The Jews were dispossessed. We were flung to the far corners of the earth, suffered unimaginable suffering because we had no homeland. But we didn't disappear, and we never gave up the dream of coming back to our ancestral homeland. The Arabs who had conquered the land basically left it barren. They never made it their own. It was a barren land. It really had, practically, it was an empty land. And in the 19th century, the idea of coming back next year in Jerusalem became a reality. By the way, in part because of Christian Zionist support for the idea of the Great Return. The Jews came back in the 19th century to the land of Israel. The result of this return was that we started building farms, factories, places of employment. Arabs from nearby countries started immigrating, and they now they call themselves Palestinians. They reconstructed history and said, we've been here for centuries. You have no right to be here. It's our land. It's not your land. It's been our land for 3,500 years. If you took over somebody's apartment, knocked them out, dispossessed them, and they never gave up the claim. They said, it's our claim. And you left this barren dump, okay? And the families, the progeny of the people you kicked out, came back, rebuilt the house. You cannot come back and tell them, you don't belong here, we're gonna kick you out, especially since you're latecomers who've come to live in part of the house, which is what the so-called Palestinians are, okay? We say to them, you can live here, we can live here, but it's our land, it's our state. And the reason this conflict continues is because the Palestinians, who represent the colonial powers, the Arab conquest of the Middle East and beyond, they are saying, you have no right for a Jewish state. Well, we do. If any people has any right to a state, if any people never gave up their dreams of returning to their ancestral home, the Jews belong to this land belongs to the Jews. The Palestinians are free to live here next to us, among us, but they're not free to demand the dissolution of the Jewish state. That is not justice, that is injustice. That's the shortest lecture I can give you about Jewish history.
This is one of the issues that's closest to my heart, and it has been for a long time. So, you know my history, I don't have to repeat it, but I'm personally a Holocaust survivor as an infant. I barely survived. My grandparents were killed in Auschwitz, and most of my extended family was killed. That's my personal background. I grew up ashamed of my Jewishness. In Hungary, after the war, I was still bullied for being Jewish. And I remember one of my friends coming to my rescue once saying, leave him alone, it's not his fault that he's Jewish. It's a fault, but it's not his fault. This was the defense. So I grew up with that. In my teenage years in Canada, I became a Zionist. This dream of the Jewish people resurrected in their historical homeland, and the barbed wire of Auschwitz being replaced by the boundaries of a Jewish state with a powerful army. I I found it liberating. It was exhilarating to believe in that dream. And I absorbed all that perspective and all that point of view, and I really believed in it. And then I found out that it wasn't exactly like that. That in order to make this Jewish dream a reality, we had to visit a nightmare on the local population. You couldn't, there was a Zionist slogan called a land without a people for a people without a land. But there was no there was no land without a people. There was people living there who'd been living there for hundreds and years or even longer. As a matter of fact, if you want to hear something really interesting, and David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, actually subscribed to this. He said this, who are the Palestinians? Because the Jews in Roman times, all of them never left Palestine. Many of them stayed there. And some of them, hundreds of years later, converted to Islam. So guess who the Palestinians are? In some ways, they might be descendants of ancient Jews. They are cousins, to say the least, no matter how you look at it. And and there's no way you could have ever created a Jewish state without oppressing and expelling the local population, which is what they did in 1947, beginning in 1947, and first of all with British Empire protection, but they did this. And then in 1948, Jewish Israeli historians, have shown without a doubt that the expulsion of the Palestinians was persistent, it was pervasive, it was cruel, it was murderous, and with deliberate attempt. So that's what's called the Nakba in Arabic, the disaster or the catastrophe. Now in Canada, there's a law that you cannot deny the Holocaust. I don't believe in such laws, by the way. But in Israel, you're not allowed to mention the Nakba, even though it was at the very basis of the foundation of the state. So once I became aware of all this, I was, okay, well, yeah, we created this beautiful dream, but we imposed a nightmare on somebody else. And then I visited the occupied territories, Russell, during the first Intifada. I cried every day for 2 weeks at what I saw. The brutality of the occupation, the petty harassment, the murderousness of it, the burning down of Palestinian or cutting down of Palestinian olive groves, the denial of water rights, the humiliations. And this went on, and it's much worse now than it was then. So this is the background. And it couldn't have been in any other way. Because again, you couldn't have created that exclusive Jewish state without oppressing or expelling the local population. It's the longest ethnic cleansing operation in the 20th and 21st centuries. It's still going on. And who are these people in Gaza? Now you have to go to Gaza. You have to go there to really appreciate it. It's a small area where there are these multiple hundreds of thousands of people. Who are those people? The direct children or grandchildren of the people that were expelled from Israel, or what is now Israel. Now here's the outrage. And I'd like your Zionist friend in the States to tell me this. I, as a Jew, I could land in Tel Aviv tomorrow and demand citizenship under the law of the right of return. But my Palestinian friend in Vancouver, Hana Kawas, who was born in Jerusalem, can't even visit. So what sense does it know? So who is Gaza? This desperate, blockaded, let me stop again. Am I talking too long about this? I'm sorry, this is so important to me and I know so much about it that I don't even know where to stop. So then you have these miserable people packed into this horrible, people call it the world's largest outdoor prison, which is what it is. Incredible poverty, 50% unemployment. Now, Hamas is an Islamic organization that was originally encouraged by Israel and supported by Israel as a counterweight to the secular Palestine Liberation Organization, which Israel didn't want to deal with. And given those conditions, of course people will go for extremist leadership. That's what people do when they're miserable and hopeless and deprived of any possibility whatsoever. You don't have to support Hamas policies to stand up for Palestinian rights. That's a complete falsity. But there were free elections in Gaza, monitored by international community. They were declared to be the freest elections ever held in the Arab world. And Hamas happened to win. And when Hamas won that election, Israel and the United States immediately organized a military coup against them, which Hamas defeated, for which the punishment was this blockade that deprives Hamas of, not Hamas, but Gaza, of food, of medical supplies, of sufficient water. I could go on and on and on and on. And then you have this conflict. And then every time there's a conflict, Israel mows the lawn. That's the expression they use. You know what they call it? They call it mowing the lawn, by which they mean the mass murder of Palestinian civilians. Now, is it true that the Gazans shoot rockets into Israel, killing innocent civilians? Yes, it is. Do I support that? No, I don't. But when it comes to the death of innocent civilians, Israel killed 20,000 Lebanese civilians in 1982 using illegal weapons like cluster bombs in a war that had no justification whatsoever. I could go on and on and on and on, except I'll say that the disproportion of power and responsibility and oppression is so markedly on one side that if you take the worst thing you can say about Hamas, multiplied by 1,000 times, and it still will not meet the Israeli repression and killing and dispossession of Palestinians. If after 2,000 years we can look for liberation and freedom, why can't the Palestinians? If you look at the Western press, when Hong Kong demonstrators throw stones at the police in Hong Kong, that's considered to be heroism in the American press. When in Myanmar, the demonstrators throw slingshots at the army, at the oppressive army, they're considered to be heroes in the Western press. When Palestinian kids throw stones at the Israeli soldiers, they're called terrorists. And Israel gets away with a lot more without much less criticism in the Western press than any other country. I'll say one more thing. I was recently contacted by a Palestinian woman from Jericho. She runs a program for Palestinian children who spend time in Israeli jails. 14, 15, 16-year-olds are jailed for months or years. Sometimes they can't see their families for months. And she runs a program for them. You know what she does? She meditates with them. She does Sufi dervish dancing with them, swirling dancing, to bring them out of their stress state. She says, we don't have post-traumatic stress disorder here because the trauma is never post. The trauma is daily, she said. I just wish your Zionist friend would visit the occupied territories in Gaza like I have, and let him speak the way he speaks now. If he's got any ounce of humanity left, he would cry like I did for 2 weeks when I was there. Now, we're not living in Nazi Germany. Anybody can go on YouTube and listen to Ilan Pappé, an Israeli historian, totally eloquent on Israeli history, who's living in England now because life became in Israel too difficult for him. Anybody can listen to Norman Finkelstein, a Jewish professor, world expert on Gaza, who was denied tenure at his university because of his public speaking against Israeli policy. You can listen to any number of Israeli Defense Forces soldiers who talk about the brutality that they now regret having committed. You can listen to Israeli pilots who talk about why they refuse to fly over Gaza because of the atrocities they're made to commit. You can get all the information you want. So if anybody these days doesn't know, it's not because the information is not available. It's not what you know, it's what you could know if you wanted to find out. There are no two sides. I mean, it's always a complex question, but in terms of power and control, and it's pretty straightforward. There was a land with the people living there, and other people wanted it. They took it over, and they continue to take it over, and they continue to discriminate against, oppress, and dispossess that other people. That's what happened, and that's what's happening.